Okay, so tonight's Great Debates, Great Decisions, Great Deciders, the third part of this mini-series from Har Meron to Har Sinai, where tonight we'll be discussing, I think the title we gave the class is How Har Sinai Saved Dovid HaMelech, saved King David. The class tonight is the third installment of a series of classes to get us prepared for the tremendous holiday that we are now in the eve of, in the eve leading up to the holiday of Shavuos, as we are going to re-accept the Torah once again. It's the anniversary. It's like a wedding anniversary. It's an amazing thing. And we want to just, before we begin the class, thank our sponsors, Jerry and Sheila Hermel, who sponsored the class this evening, and to say a mazel tov in honor of their daughter, now Dr. Rebecca Hermel, who just graduated from NYU's dental school. So we wish them a mazel tov. And thank you very much for sponsoring. And as we always do, we like to set up our class around the original sources in order to fully appreciate it. So let's take a look. Give me a thumbs up if you can see my screen. Thumbs up? Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Daniel. All right. So, to give a little bit of context to this Gemara we're about to see, and I should have mentioned before that if everyone could please mute themselves to give an optimal learning, listening experience to everyone, that would be greatly appreciated. To give a little bit of context to this piece of the Talmud we're about to learn together, we really have to talk about Dovid HaMelech himself, King David. Who was King David? What did what was his major accomplishments? What are things that to today we still live by? What King David did, and arguably King David David HaMelech was the greatest of all of the kings that the Jewish people ever had. Dovid HaMelech's reign as king was from the year 2884 to 2924. We're now in the year 5780. So we're talking about 3,000 years ago. This is Dovid. This is even before the first temple was even erected. Dovid HaMelech created the blueprint for erecting the first temple that then was built by his son Shlomo HaMelech. And Dovid HaMelech, when you just read through the stories in Sefer Shmuel about Dovid HaMelech, it's something that you become taken by, his honesty, his genuine nature, and it's someone that kind of like fits every single characteristic of someone that we would consider to be a leader, a true leader. The beginning of Shlomo HaMelech's reign over the Jewish people really even begins in the context of living in the shadow of Dovid HaMelech. In fact, Shlomo HaMelech, his son's major contribution to the Jewish people was in the area of Jewish philosophy and Jewish thought. One example of that is in his Sefer Mishlei, in Proverbs, where Shlomo HaMelech goes through basically the Jewish sayings that are supposed to be our guiding lights. And the way Mishlei even begins is Mishlei Shlomo ben Dovid, that these are the Proverbs of Shlomo, the son of David, Melech Yisrael. David Melech Yisrael, that this is the type of person we're talking about. We're talking about a type of person who really was the definition of what it means to be a Melech Yisrael. This comes alive as well in the works of Dovid HaMelech, Sefer Tehillim namely, where we see that Dovid HaMelech struggled in his relationship with God. Like every good leader is a bit complex. Someone who works on themselves, refines themselves in order to become the great people that we know them to become. The 40 years of Dovid HaMelech's reign was not always easy. He was usually on the run during that time from his father-in-law. He had a son that turned on him. It wasn't always easy for David HaMelech, but regardless, David HaMelech always, his main focus was giving over to the Jewish people and giving over of himself more to a higher power, namely to God. But David HaMelech almost did not become king. David HaMelech not only did not almost become king, but almost was even kicked out of Klal Yisrael. And it's an amazing thing, a scary thing to think about, that David HaMelech, this person that we read through his Sefer Tehillim and we're inspired by his life, this person, David HaMelech, King David, the one who defines the Melech Yisrael, the kingship of Israel, was almost dismissed from being king and even almost dismissed from being a member of the tribe. Take a look at what happened in the Gemara. The Gemara records the episode leading up to when David fights Goliath, when David fights Goliath, and he puts on the king's armor, and it fits him like a glove, and it's a sign that he is destined for this kingship. But then there's this one fellow, his name is Doeg HaAdomi, who is basically the commander-in-chief to Shaul HaMelech, David HaMelech, what would come his father-in-law, David HaMelech's father-in-law. He's the commander-in-chief, this Doeg HaAdomi fellow, and he starts, saying, maybe, this fellow David, not only is he not, fit to be king, but he may not even be fit to be part of the Jewish nation. The Gemara says the following: Amarle Doeg HaAdomi says to Shaul, Ad sha'ata mashil alav im hagun hula malchus imlav. Before you start figuring out whether or not David would make a good king and whether or not he's fit to be king, first, Shaul alav im ra'ui lavo bakahal imlav. First, you should even check whether or not he's allowed to be part of the Jewish people. Now, everyone starts scratching their heads. What are you talking about, Doeg? My timer, what was his reason? Deka'asi mirus hamovia, because David was the great-grandson of Rus. Where was Rus from? She was a Moabite. Now, the story of Rus, which we read on Shavuos, is a story of a young girl who, unfortunately, her husband, along with her brother-in-law, died at a young age. She didn't have any children, and she followed her mother-in-law to the land of Israel. She met this fellow Boaz, and Boaz was a distant relative, and he took her in, and it's a beautiful story. And David HaMelech ended up becoming the great-grandson of Rus. So what's it a problem if he came from Rus? So the Torah tells us that anyone who's from the nation of Ammon or Moab is not allowed to join into the Jewish people, is not allowed to convert. You're not allowed to marry someone. You're not allowed to bring them into the Jewish people if they're from the nation of Ammon or Moab. Why? So our rabbis teach us because Ammon and Moab stem from a inappropriate relationship that took place between Lot and his daughters, where Lot's daughters took advantage of him, and they named their children Ammon and Moab, which basically means from dad. That was the names of the children, the offspring that came from their father's seed. So then Rus ended up being, many generations later, came from this same lineage. So if that's the case, since the Torah says, Ammoni u'Moavi lo yavo b'kahal Hashem, that anyone from the nation of Ammon and Moab is not allowed to come into the fold of the Jewish people, so then therefore David HaMelech, who's the great-grandson of Rus, the Moabite, should not be allowed to come into the Jewish people. Forget being king. He can't even be a part of the nation. So Amar le Avner. Avner, now comes to stand up for David HaMelech. Avner also was a general in the army and also was an advisor to Shaul, but was a much more honest thinker and said, hold on one second. No. We have a teaching. Our oral law teaches us, Tanina, Ammoni velo Moavis. The Torah uses the masculine language when talking about the prohibition of people from Ammon and Moab, the nations of Ammon and anyone from the nation of Moab coming into the Jewish people. It uses it in a masculine tense, and therefore, says our oral tradition, that only the men from Ammon or Moab are not allowed to come into the Jewish people. Ammoni velo Ammonis, Moavi velo Moabis. However, a Moabite woman is certainly allowed to come into the Jewish people, and therefore it's no issue that Dovid came from Rus, the Moabite. Good, Avner solved the problem. No issues. Why? Because Rus was a woman who came from Moab, and anyone who's a woman from Moab is allowed to convert to Judaism, and therefore Dovid HaMelech, who comes from that offspring, not an issue for him to be a part of the Jewish people. But this fellow, Doeg, is not giving up. Ela ma'ata mamzer v'lo mamzeres, and he starts giving all these textual proofs as to why the argument of Avner is no good. Basically, just to wrap up to this part, end of scene 1, is that there is a big tumult going on, because it seems like David is perfect to be king. It seems like he's fitting right in to be the king of the Jewish people. However, comes along this fellow Doeg and says, no, he has an illegitimate lineage, and therefore he has to be kicked out, not just from being king, but from being a part of the Jewish people in general. Why? Because he's from the nation of Moab. Comes along Avner and says, hold on one second. If you read our Torah carefully, using our oral tradition, using our way of extrapolating law from the Torah, one can reason and say that no, only men from Moab are not allowed to be a part of the Jewish people. However, offspring that comes from a woman from Moab, namely Rus, who is a Moabite woman, and then that would come down to David, that's not an issue. However, this fellow Doeg uses every single textual proof he can to disagree, and he is fighting tooth and nail, saying that David is not allowed to be, forget king of the Jewish people, he's not even allowed to be a part of the Jewish people. Look at what happens next. So now Shaul is getting nervous. And Shaul says, forget all this. Why are just the two of you arguing about it? You two are generals in an army. Go to the Beis HaMedrash. Go to the house of study and go find out what's the law. Don't forget the two of you. Go higher up. Go to the people who actually make the rules and go find out from the rabbis what's the story. Can David be a part of the Jewish people or not? And that's exactly what they did. V'sha'al bebeis hamedrash. They went to go ask in the Beis HaMedrash. Sha'al, amrule. They asked, and the rabbis responded, and they said exactly what Avner said. No, this prohibition is only limited to men coming into the Jewish people, not women. And since Rus was a woman from Moab, she was allowed to join, and therefore her lineage is perfectly good. And David, being a part of that, is allowed to be a part of the faith. However, if Gishilehu Doeg kol hani kushiasa, however, Doeg started fighting with the rabbis, and to the point that he was able to ishtiku, he was able to silence them. Basically, Doeg is able to prove all the rabbis wrong. Now we have a big problem. It's not just Avner that Doeg proved to that David should not be allowed to join the Jewish people, but he now proved it to all of the rabbis. So now we have a big problem, because David HaMelech, it seems like the odds are stacked against him, that he is not only going to lose the kingship, but he's going to be kicked out of the Jewish people in general. However, Baila Hruzi Aleh, he wanted to denounce him completely. Miyad, immediately, look at what happens next. And what happens next is one of the most confusing things you're going to come across. Because we have this like huge uproar that happened where we have this one fellow Doeg who is bringing all these good textual arguments in his favor to denounce David HaMelech, which could potentially change all of Jewish history. And not only that, but he rallied all of the rabbis onto his side. But then there's this one fellow who's going to come along and flip the whole story, and we're going to be lost as to how he did that. Miyad v'amsha ben ish ushmo Yisra ha-Yisraeli. That this fellow Yisra, the Israeli, asher ba el Avigail bas Nachash v'ksiv Yeser ha-Yishmaeli, that this fellow whose nickname is Ishmaeli, Amarava Malavish Yechigar Cherbo ki Ishmael, this fellow named Yisra, okay? We don't know much about Yisra, but this fellow Yisra is sitting in the base medrash, and he's hearing this whole conversation. He's hearing the fact that Dovid, his lineage might be destroyed, and he's hearing all these textual arguments taking place about whether or not Rus, who is a Moabite woman, would have been allowed to join the Jewish people or not, and he's hearing all of this textual argument going on. He gets up, and he lifts up his sword. He girts his sword like a Yishmaeli. And in this angry type of a way, the Amar, and he says, Kol mi she'einu shomea halacha zu, that anyone who does not follow the halacha that says that a woman from Moab is perfectly allowed to join the Jewish people, Yidkar becherev, I'm going to run through you with my sword. That's it. Kach megublani mebeis dino shel Shmuel haramasi. Because this is a tradition that I have going back to Shmuel Hanavi. Amonis Moavi v'lo Moabis. That a woman from Moab is allowed to join the Jewish people. That's it. End of story. I have an oral tradition for it. And anyone who doesn't believe me, you want to challenge David HaMelech, that's it. I'm going to cut your head off. You're done. You're finished. End of story. What just happened? How did this fellow, Yeser, who, I don't know who Yeser is, but it seems like it's a guy who just had a little bit of an anger issue, that they should have just detained him and said, okay, sir, like this is not the way that we have, these highly intellectual conversations. Like we're having a very intellectual conversation over here that has tremendous ramifications. I mean, can you imagine in the Supreme Court of the United States, where there's a major dispute going on that can have ramifications for generations, and they're going back and forth analyzing different aspects of the U.S. Constitution and going with all of these proofs, and then this one guy gets up, takes out a gun and says, okay, listen, if you don't follow my opinion, I'm taking down everybody here. What would happen? They'd send the SWAT team in. They take the guy down. But this fellow, Yeser, he takes out his sword, and everyone says, you know what? Guy makes a good point. We're going to follow his opinion. And therefore, Dovid is saved. How did that just happen? So in order to properly understand this, we have to go all the way back to the original source, and that is Har Sinai. We have to re-engage with what we're about to celebrate the anniversary of in just a few hours from now. Take a look at the following Gemara, which really discusses what happened at Har Sinai. Now, we know the basic Judaism 101 is that the Jewish people are unique in that we have a Torah. Now, it's not just unique that we have a book of law, a code of ethics, but we have a unique code of ethics and law that was given to us in mass revelation to the entire people as one, standing at the foot of Mount Sinai. The Gemara tells us that maybe even the mountain was held over us, different explanations why it was held over us. Okay, fine. So I'm not talking about now the aesthetics of Har Sinai or, the different aesthetics of what exactly the scene looked like. The fact that we were able to hear lightning and see thunder, the Torah says. No, I did not mix that up. That's what the Torah says. We were able to hear lightning and see thunder, right? But that's not what I'm here to discuss when I say what happened at Har Sinai. What I mean when I say what happened at Har Sinai is, what were we given at Har Sinai? After the episode ended of Har Sinai, what did we walk away with? So take a look at what it says in the Gemara in Brachos on Daf Hey. The Amr of Levi Bar Chama, Amr of Shimon ben Lakish. Rabbi Levi Bar Chama says in the name of Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish, My dichsiv, what does the Torah mean when it says, Ve'etne lecha es luchos ha'evin v'ha'torah v'ha'mitzvos asher kasafti lehorosam, the Torah, in the context of Kabbalah HaTorah, of accepting the Torah. The Torah records that God gave us the luchos ha'even, the tablets of stone, HaTorah, he gave us the Torah, HaMitzvah, he gave us mitzvos, Asher kasafti, that I have written, lehorosam, in order for you to teach it, which sounds like he gave us 5 things. So what were these 5 things that were given to us at Har Sinai? So the Gemara tells us and explains as follows. Luchos, the tablets of stone, Elu Aseres Hadibros, that's referring to the 10 commandments, which were written on the tablets of stone. Torah, what does it mean by Torah? Zemikra. These are the 5 books of Moses. You know why Jews have big noses? So we could stick them in the 5 books of Moses. So we got the 2 tablets and we got the 5 books of Moses. Okay, we got the Torah, the written Torah, the HaMitzvah, and we received the mitzvah. What does that mean, mitzvah? So mitzvah, the Talmud tells us, is referring to Mishnah, the oral law. Asher kasafti, that I have written, Elu neviim uksuvim, the prophets and the writings, all were given to us at Har Sinai. Lehorosam, in order to teach them, Ze Gemara. That is the Gemara, which is the reasonings and the explanation, the exegesis on each of the 613 commandments and on our oral tradition. All of those things were given to us at Har Sinai, which basically sounds like, says the Gemara, Malamed shekulam nitula Moshe miSinai. It sounds like at Har Sinai, we walked away with everything. Every single thing a Jew needs to know was given to us at Har Sinai, and maybe even more than that. We were literally, every single book that you can find in the Jewish library, it sounds like, was already given to us at Har Sinai. Now, hold on one second. The prophets and the writings were given to us at Har Sinai. Sefer Tehillim, we spoke about Dovid HaMelech, composed much of Sefer Tehillim. Dovid HaMelech was not alive during Matan Torah, during the giving of the Torah. Dovid HaMelech did not compose Sefer Tehillim until much after the episode of the Jewish people receiving the Torah. So how could that be? The writings and the prophets were given to us at Har Sinai. The writings and the prophets, their authors weren't even alive at the time. So if that's the case, what does that mean that they were given to us at Har Sinai? Mishnah and Gemara, it's an even stronger question. Mishnah was composed by Rabbi HaKadosh. Rabbi HaKadosh lived in the 3rd century, in the 2nd and 3rd century after the destruction of the Second Temple. And he put together the Mishnah as a way to hold on to the to the oral traditions that we had, that we received at Har Sinai. But contained within the Mishnah are a number of discussions that took place between rabbis that lived many, many, many generations after Har Sinai. The Gemara, forget about it. The Gemara was put together only in the year 550, which is, again, many, many, many years after the giving of the Torah at Har Sinai. So what does this mean when the Gemara tells us that every single one of these things, every single book you'll find in a Jewish library was given to us at Har Sinai. So there's a number of ways you can go with this. One is that it all goes back to the experience of Sinai. That the experience of Sinai, of God revealing himself in that way, really informs the way that we approach every single one of these studies. So it's really not that all of these things were practically given to us at Har Sinai, but rather Har Sinai and the episode of Har Sinai informs the way that we study each of these books that are found in a Jewish library, like the Mishnah, the Gemara, the prophets, the writings, every single one of these volumes. However, the Rambam, when he cites this passage in the Talmud, cites it in a little bit of a different way. And when he does this in a little bit of a different way, it opens up a whole understanding as to, in reality, what happened on Har Sinai in the sense of what did we really take away at Har Sinai. Take a look at what the Rambam says. The Rambam wrote basically three major works in his lifetime. The three major works that he wrote, number one, when he was about 31 years old, between 30 and 35 years old, something like that, the Rambam, who lived 1138 to 1204, was unbelievable. Moshe ben Maimon, and at the age of around 31 years old, he wrote a commentary on the Mishnah that was written in Arabic. And it was basically a way. It was like it was like an Arabic version, a Middle Eastern version of an art scroll, where what the Rambam did was that he opened up the Mishnah for the layperson who did not have the ability to learn Mishnah on their own. So what he did is that he translated the Mishnah into Arabic. And also included with it his own take on the Mishnah and some halacha built in as to how this Mishnah applies to us practically. Then later in life, he wrote his magnum opus, which is called the Mishnah Torah. The Mishnah Torah is sitting right up there. Right over here is the Mishnah Torah. It's a 14-volume set that goes through every single law that is found in both the written Torah and the oral Torah, and he reorganizes everything in a very systematic way, in order so that if a Jew needs to know what to do, all they need to know, all they do is they look in the index, they look up, I need to know what bracha to make on an apple, so they look up, the laws of blessings. They flip through, okay, the table of contents of laws of blessings. These are the laws of blessings on food products. You read through the chapter. Oh, great, apples are ha'etz. Good. Now I know what to do. And that was his whole purpose. He writes in the introduction that all you're going to need is my work, because it really, it's all encompassing. It has everything you need to know. Great, wonderful. Spoiler alert. This work of the Rambam, even though he thought this would be the only work that is needed, to date there is no Jewish piece of literature that has more commentaries on it than the Rambam's work, the Mishnah Torah. Even though he thought that this is the only work that we would need, but we know that two Jews, three opinions, and he thought he'd get away with only one opinion. Not going to happen. Then the Rambam wrote a philosophic work, which was also supposed to be for the layperson to better understand and approach the basic mitzvos in a more rational way. It came with a lot of a criticism from Nachmanides, the Ramban, who lived. They overlapped a little bit in their lifetimes for about 10 years. When the Ramban was about 10 years old is when the Rambam, Maimonides, passed away already. So I don't think they ever met or ever talked about it. But later when the Ramban saw this work, it was a work that he was uncomfortable with because of just how rational it was. Anyway, so as an introduction to the Rambam's Mishnah Torah, that 14-volume set where he goes through every single piece of Jewish law, he gives an introduction to what happened at Har Sinai. Where did I get all these laws from? So he says, Kol ha-mitzvos, that all of the mitzvos, shenitnu lo l'Moshe b'Sinai, that all of the mitzvos, basically the 613 mitzvos, that were given to Moshe at Har Sinai, again, that we are going to be celebrating the anniversary of in just a few hours, B'perushan nitnu, were given with their explanations. Shene Amar, as the Torah says, and this is going to be a pasuk we're familiar with because we just saw it quoted in the Talmud. Ve'etna lecha es luchos ha'even, v'haTorah v'hamitzvah. And I'm going to give to you the luchos, the tablets of stone, the Torah, which is the written Torah, the HaMitzvah, the oral Torah. What did the Rambam do? He cut the pasuk in half. He didn't quote the rest. He left out HaMitzvah asher kasafti lahorosam. He left out those last two parts. So that's the first thing we have to pick up over here. He left out two parts at the end. And then he goes on to explain, what does Torah mean? Zu Torah shebichsav, that's written, that's referring to the written Torah. And mitzvah ze pirusheha. Mitzvah refers to the way to explain the written Torah. And that is what was given to us at Har Sinai. We got the oral Torah, and we got the written Torah and the oral tradition to understand the written Torah. Why did the Rambam leave out that entire Gemara? Take a look again. The Gemara added in a number of other things. The Gemara said we received the writings of the prophets and the writings, and we received the Gemara, and we received the Mishnah, and that the Rambam just takes that whole second half, all of those things. He takes Mishnah, he takes Gemara, he takes prophets and writings, and he groups it all together into the way to understand the written Torah. What is the Rambam trying to teach us? So the Rambam in another place, and we're not going to read it inside, I'm going to just share it outside with you. The Rambam, in his introduction to his commentary on the Mishnah, again, when he wrote this when he was about 30 years old, the Rambam goes through that there are about 5 different areas of Torah study. What are those 5 different areas of Torah study? There is Perushim Mikubalim. That's number 1. He says basically things that no one argues on, just generally accepted understandings of the Torah. The Torah says this, there's really only one way to understand it. I'll give you an example. The example the Rambam gives is that on the first day of Sukkot, we have to take for ourselves a pre-Eitz Hadar, a beautiful fruit. What's that referring to? This is the pasuk with regard to the 4 species having to take lulav and esrog. So pre-Eitz Hadar, a beautiful fruit, is referring to an esrog. Have you ever seen anyone on Sukkot use anything but an esrog to shake with their lulav? No. It's completely accepted. No one in the history of the world, no Jew in their right mind, if they're trying to follow Torah law, has ever used anything but an esrog when trying to shake the lulav and esrog. But let's say I found pumpkins to be a beautiful fruit. Pumpkins are watermelons. Watermelons are just gorgeous. And therefore, I think that watermelon would fit the criteria of the written Torah, of what the Torah says is that I have to take a beautiful fruit. I am completely taken by the way that a watermelon looks, and therefore I want to take a watermelon with my lulav. Absolutely not, because there are certain things that are generally accepted, and that comes straight from Moshe at Har Sinai, standing on the mountain. Number 2 are things that are not in the written text, but rather oral tradition that God told Moshe to say at Har Sinai, but he told him, don't write it down. And don't give any hint to it in the pasuk. I want it to be just as binding as something that is from the Torah. However, it's not going to be physically written in the Torah. That's called the halacha l'Moshe Sinai, where a law was taught at Har Sinai. And it has to be this way. For example, the fact that tefillin need to be black. You won't find any hint to that in the Torah at all. All it says in the Torah is that we have to tie a symbol on our hands and hang it from our heads between our eyes. That's all it says in the Torah. It doesn't say what color they have to be. It doesn't say what shape they have to be. All it says is that I have to hang some sort of ornament from my head and from my arm. However, our tradition from Sinai teaches us that it needs to be square and it needs to be black. That's halacha Moshe Sinai. Says the Rambam, those first two areas, no one could ever argue on. Though, if there's a tradition that goes all the way back to Har Sinai, to understand something a certain way, or that there's a superimposed halacha that goes all the way back to Har Sinai, no one can argue on that. The areas of Torah where we find disputes about, which really take up the majority of our Talmud, our Mishnah, these discussions, these lively discussions that we study all the time, that is really the second half of Torah learning, which is that at Har Sinai, Moshe didn't just tell us what to do, but Moshe also said, when he gave us the Torah, and this was straight from God, he said that there's also some gray area. And God is purposely leaving some gray area in the written Torah because he's expecting you, his people, to work through and try and understand the Torah to the best of your ability. Oh, but Moshe says, don't worry. I'll give you some tools to guide you in your studies. And he gives a certain set of rules. But with a set of rules and different ways of learning and expounding upon those gray areas in the Torah, so depending on which way you're looking at it, you can get to a different conclusion, right? If I'm looking out onto the street and I see something happen down below, I'm looking from my window, but someone else could be looking from a different window or could be on the ground level and see something completely different. We saw the same thing happen, but it had a completely different comprehension for each of us. Why? Because we were looking at it from a different angle. Says God to Moshe and to the Jewish people that the Torah is going to have that gray area. And I'm expecting each of you to try and figure out with the following system, to try and understand the Torah. And you're going to come to different conclusions, but each one is legitimate. Because I'm purposely setting up the Torah to have those multi-reasons, that it could have variety to it. However, there are certain things that no one can argue with. And that's what Moshe needed to teach us explicitly at Har Sinai, of how to do certain mitzvos. If I'm going to write tefillin in the Torah, and I just left it like that, that's too vague. No one can do anything with that. Therefore, Moshe needed to superimpose how one is supposed to fulfill that mitzvah by telling us they need to be black and they need to be square. And the same is true with regard to the esrog. A pre-Eitz Hadar. Maybe it's when we say just a beautiful fruit, so that opens it up. Anyone can take anything. Moshe needed to tell us that, it needs to be an esrog. However, the vast majority of the Torah is open to interpretation under the principles of how to interpret the Torah. With this in mind, we can understand why the Rambam decided to leave out that other half of the Gemara. It's not that he was leaving it out. It's that he was grouping it all together with the Perusheha, that there are certain things found in the prophets and in the writings and in the Gemara and in the Mishnah that really do date back all the way to Moshe Rabbeinu. But it's just a few things. It's really just the things that Moshe needed to tell us then. However, majority of what was given to us at Har Sinai was left vague purposely with a set of rules in order so that we can be actively engaged in trying to understand the Torah. With all of this in mind, we can now go back to understand how Dovid was defended. Dovid HaMelech, King David, the author of Tehillim, one of the most genuine and honest characters in our entire Bible, who reigned for 40 years as the king of the Jewish people and goes down in history as the Melech Yisrael. Why was it that he was able to stay in his kingship, and why is it that he was able to stay as a part of the nation? I thought that this fellow, Doeg, had really good arguments. He had really supreme arguments to show why Dovid can't be a part of the people. using all these textual proofs. However, as soon as this fellow Yeser comes and says, hold on 1 second, you're assuming that this law of that a Moabite woman is allowed to join the Jewish people, you're assuming that that's based simply on the text. And that's based on our interpretation of something that's a little bit gray in the Torah. However, I have a tradition that goes all the way back to Shmuel HaNavi, that then goes back to Har Sinai, that tells me, no, there's only one way to understand this pasuk. That when the Torah says someone from the nation of Moab is not allowed to come to the Jewish people, it means only men and not women. And that goes all the way back to Moshe Rabbeinu. And that's why the conversation ends right there. The conversation ends because as soon as someone uses the argument of, no, this is not something up for discussion because it goes back all the way to Har Sinai, so then that's when the discussion is going to end. What's so amazing about this Gemara is that this is one Gemara, one page of the Talmud, half a page of the Talmud. It's really like a quarter of a page of the Talmud, right? And there are a few other places in the Talmud that have these kinds of conclusions. Well, where the Gemara says, no, it's halacha l'Moshe Sinai. But there are more than 1,000, probably close to 2,000 other more places in the Gemara, thousands of places in the Gemara, where things are discussed, and there is a back and forth, and there is this living Torah, and there isn't this argument of, we do it because we were told to do it, and that's it. You can't ask any questions. At the end of the day, we do what we're told to do because God said it, and therefore we do it. But God also expects us to be active in it, to try and figure out why we do what we do. In fact, that's why the Ramban says that it's so important to try and understand the reasons, the ethical principles that come from the mitzvos. At the end of the day, why do we do what we do? Because God said so. But says the Ramban, it's so important for us to engage in the reasons behind the mitzvos. Why? Because God expects us to figure out the ethics of each and every mitzvah. He expects us to take apart the mitzvah of lulav, for example, and figure out, well, why is it that God commands us to take a lulav and esrog, hadassim, and aravos before Sukkot? Why is it that God commands us to eat matzah? Why are you asking the question why? God told you to do it, so you do it. It's as simple as that. Don't ask questions. We even find sometimes in the Torah where God will say, don't ask questions. Okay, so there are certain times where God says, listen, this is beyond your understanding. But that's not most of the Torah. 99% of the Torah is God expecting us to try and figure out, to engage with him in such a way where we'll be able to pull out guiding principles, to be able to build a sense of moral ethics from each and every mitzvah. That, says the Ramban, is the understanding of mitzvos, for example, like Kedoshim to you, be holy. Shkayach, how do I don't even know what that means. Be holy. How am I supposed to be holy? Va'asisa va'yasher va'atov. Do what is upright and justice. What? Do the right thing. What's the right thing? How am I supposed to know? It's God, like, you want me to do the right thing? So tell me what's the right thing to do. What's this mitzvah of do the right thing? It says in the Torah. Va'asisa va'yasher va'atov. Says the Ramban, you know how you're supposed to figure out how to do the right thing? By figuring out the underpinnings of every single mitzvah. And through that, you're going to be able to build a sense of ethics that are going to be guiding in that way. That says the Bartanura. There's an amazing piece from Rav Ovadia Bartanura, who lived in the 16th century and was a major commentary on the Mishnah. The Mishnah at the beginning of Pirkei Avos says, Moshe kibel Torah misinai, that Moshe received the Torah from Har Sinai. Now, Pirkei Avos is a book of ethics. It's even called, some English translations refer to Pirkei Avos as the ethics of our fathers. Moshe kibel Torah misinai. Moshe received the Torah at Har Sinai. Where are the ethics in that? And moreover, why would this very critical, fundamental idea of the fact that Moshe received the Torah at Har Sinai, that shouldn't be stuck at the beginning of a book of ethics, but rather it should be at the beginning of all the Mishnayos. The Mishnayos start with brachos. Pirkei Avos is about 4/6 of the way through all of the Mishnah. So put Moshe Kibbutz Torah Sinai, that Moshe received the Torah at Har Sinai, put it all the way at the beginning. Good, Moshe received the Torah at Har Sinai, now let's begin trying to understand what all those laws are. Good, beginning of the Mishnayos. But Rabbi HaKadosh stuck it in Pirkei Avos, a book of ethics. This is this sentence has to do with law. That Moshe received the Torah at Har Sinai, says the Bartanura, because at Har Sinai we didn't just receive simply a set of rules, but in those rules have guiding principles of just how to be a good person, of how to achieve Asisa V'Yashav V'Tov, do the right thing. Like my father would always tell me before I would go out somewhere, he'd say, if you're unsure whether or not you should do something, make your decision as if I'm standing right next to you. Like, okay, but how am I supposed to know what's the right thing? How am I supposed to know if you're standing right next to me, you would tell me to do this or not? Well, being that I learned from my father's ways, so then I'd be able to figure it out. That's what God expects from us. He's giving us this Torah. That God willing, in just a few hours from now, when we celebrate the holiday of Shavuos, what we're going to be doing is celebrating the fact that we have this guidebook to life. That we have with us an amazing opportunity where God is telling us through his mitzvos that if you engage with them, you learn them, you delve into them, and you figure out the underpinnings of each mitzvah, you're going to build for yourself the guiding principles of how to be a good person in this world. I wish everyone a beautiful Shavuos, a Shavuos where we engage in the Torah in this way, we reaffirm our commitment to the Torah in this way, and then through that, we are able to inform ourselves, we're able to then use that we learn from the Torah, spread the wealth to our friends, to our family, to our loved ones, and through that, we're going to end up we're going to live in so much of a better world that Mashiach's just going to come like that. Probably, I'm assuming that by the second day of Shavuos, Mashiach is going to be here. That's it. It's as simple as that. Because when we engage in the Torah in this way, we simply become just good people. And then Mashiach is going to come. Okay, we'll stop here for now. I can hang out for a couple of minutes if anyone has any questions.
Thank you so much, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi.
My pleasure.